Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and Cryptids encounter stories. First story. Monster I carried out of the woods. I found a monster in the woods. Every year I spend a week in the woods alone. I cannot stand being inside my empty house on the anniversary of when I lost everything important in my life. The walls close in on me, and I feel suffocated. So, I go to the woods. I sleep, drink, and try to shoot at least one deer. On the second day of my trip, I was walking through the forest in damp weather, feeling miserable when I came across it. A creature hanging by its foot from a tree. I panicked when I first saw the figure strung up in the tree and rushed forward, hoping if it was a person I could still help. As I got closer, I saw that even though its body was similar to a human, all the proportions looked wrong. The legs far too long and skinny. The stomach sunken in, rib cage visible, making it seem like it had no muscle mass or fat. I stopped below the creature, staring up at it in disbelief of what I was seeing. One foot was stuck inside a bear trap that was attached to a chain, hooked over a branch. Its entire body was hanging from a torn and bloody ankle snared inside the trap. Wrists tied together and arms so long they nearly reached the ground as they dangled past its head. The creature's face was covered by a blank wooden oval with moss spilling out from it. At first, I was certain it was dead. As I got closer, I saw the chest rise weakly as if let out small wheezing breaths from under the mask. Even without seeing what was under the mask, I knew this thing wasn't human. The woods had a bad reputation of people going missing. Most didn't like camping overnight inside the forest anymore. It was a good place to fish and hunt, but not to stay the night. I had my hunting rifle with me. I could put it out of its misery, or just left it alone. Someone put this thing here. They might be back for it. Misty rain came down, and I could see puff of my breath in the terrible weather. My feet cold and fingers stiff. It would get dark in a few hours. I should go back to my camp and get dry, or else I would get sick. Or leave this damned forest before any more of these creatures came for me. Instead, I did something only an insane person would. I placed my gear on the ground to climb the tree to get the creature down. It was the middle of the night when the creature stirred. I treated the wounds the best I could. Getting the bear trap off without cutting my hand took almost an hour to do. Dragging the lanky thing back to camp worn me out, and I still needed to dry the creature off and wrap up its wounds. The damn thing better appreciate what I did for it. While I waited for it to wake up, I sat by the fire, sitting under a tarp to keep dry. I let the monster I dragged back use my tent, keeping the flap open so I could keep an eye on it. I was dead tired, but didn't want to fall asleep with whatever the thing was close by to eat me in my sleep. Its limbs were so long I had to fold them to make sure it fit inside my small tent. At some point in the middle of the night, I heard movement in my tent. Slowly a hand came out, long fingers testing the damp ground. I couldn't see the thing's expression because of the mask and moss covering its entire head. Even while it slept, I didn't dare look what it really looked like. I remained still, wrapped up in my spare blanket. If it attacked, I could shoot it, but I didn't even reach for my rifle. Half of the creature's body came out of the tent, body freezing up when it sensed me nearby. The next few seconds were tense. Neither of us moved, waiting for the other to act first. I'd hoped this would be a treat and release process, that when this creature woke up, it would just go back off into the woods. I was not so lucky. It made the choice to attack the easy target. Darting forward, it cleared the distance between us quickly. I was knocked over, thin bony hands pinning me down to the ground. The mask flipped up so fast I never saw what was underneath. Sharp teeth grabbed a hold of my jacket and started to shake it, tearing the fabric, but not reaching my skin. The attack didn't last very long. I was fully ready to accept my death in that moment. After all, I had nothing waiting for me outside of that forest. If I could become food, at least my death would mean something. But this creature didn't even give me that. It stopped, releasing my coat and staggered back, collapsing on its side. It let out ragged, wheezing breaths. It used up all its strength in that thin body. I watched it, wondering what to do next. I grabbed a blanket from my tent, trying to wrap it up to keep the creature warm. It weakly pushed my hands away, sharp claws catching my coat but not tearing it. Wrapping the thing very much like a burrito, I went about getting it back inside the tent. I couldn't see the creature's expression, but I could sense how annoyed my new campmate was being manhandled and wrapped up. Until it regained some strength, it would need to accept some help. I went back outside, wrapped myself in my own blanket again, and stared back into the weak fire. I planned on staying up all night, but I drifted between sleep until dawn came. Out in the trees I heard sounds, as if someone was walking around in the dark just beyond my camp. Fear fluttered in my stomach. I was out in the open, exhausted from the cold weather. I didn't mind death, but I was still afraid of whatever was stalking around in the night. When morning arrived, I looked around the camp to find someone, or something had in fact been circling my camp. Muddy tracks and broken twigs gave me enough evidence of being watched. I wondered if it was more of those creatures waiting to grab the injured on inside the tent. At least I lived through one night so far. My new guest was out of the tent when I got back to camp. It wrapped in a blanket, glaring at me from under the mask. I could feel the eyes on me, even if I couldn't see them. I needed to think of what to do next. I could just pack up and leave. I doubted these things would follow me into the city. It still wasn't healed up and wouldn't be able to protect itself if whoever hung it up came back. Trying to get the creature to eat, it had no interest in the hot dogs and marshmallows I brought. It was a little surreal seeing a lanky creature like it in the dim gray morning light. This thing wasn't human, and yet I was helping it for reasons I didn't know. Aside from people, this thing might eat other meat. If I could shoot some game, maybe a good meal would help it gain some strength back. And maybe for all my trouble, I would be eaten in the end. Only time would tell how thankful this thing would be for all the help. I didn't want to go off into the forest hunting alone. If another person came across my camp, I didn't want them to come across my monster. One of them would end up dead if that happened. I paced trying to think of what to do. As if it could sense my train of thought, the lanky creature bundled the blanket, putting it inside the tent to stay dry. Then, it climbed up my back, lanky limbs wrapping around me. My skin crawled and stood, back bent trying to support the sudden weight change. I waited for the attack that never came. We just awkwardly stood there waiting on each other to do something. I could go hunting if I carried the creature on my back. It would take longer than normal, but could be done. Picking up my rifle and small pack, I started off into the trees, still really creeped out by the thing that I decided to help. At least it wasn't trying to eat me. I really needed to call the creature on my back something. Naming things was difficult. I went through at least 100 while sneaking through the woods, trying to pick up on any game tracks. I didn't know what it was beside not human. Skinwalker and Wendigo just didn't suit what it was from what I've heard about them. No legends or cryptid name felt right. Soon I found myself not caring if I had the name of its species. I doubted humans even came across them often enough to give it a name. I was startled out of my thoughts when I came right up on a deer. A decent-sized buck that should have run before I even got this close. Holding my breath, I froze, hand on my rifle. Careful to make as little noise as possible, I raised my weapon to get my shot lined up. For a moment I wondered what I was doing was even right. This thing I was taking care of could be evil. The missing person cases was a hint towards that. Then again, it might just be a part of nature. Killing a deer to feed the creature wouldn't be wrong if this is what happened in the woods without me interfering. I shot twice for good measure. The buck fell with a grunt of surprise. The thing on my back dropped to the ground moving like liquid. It sulked towards the fallen creature, masked face darting around as if it expected something was going to swoop in and take its food. While watching it eat, I decided on a name in the worst way possible. I've seen videos of what a fox sound like. Those nightmare screeches and sounds were the same kind this creature made while it tore into the deer and ate. Because its back was turned to me, I never saw its face. Just the fact the mask was lifted so it could bite and tear off chunks of flesh. Fox felt like a suitable name for the monster I'd taken in. Fox, I said mostly to myself, trying the name out. The creature slightly turned at my voice, letting me see a human-looking mouth, but filled with bloody sharp teeth. I think he liked the name. Fox ate through the entire deer with insane speed. Even after devouring through pounds of meat, he was still skinny enough for me to see his rib cage. It was a mystery where he put it all. Gathering up the larger bones, he followed behind me back to the camp. At least he could walk now, although limping and trailing behind. He crawling mostly on all fours, even though he was holding bones in his hands. I led him to the river first so he could get cleaned up in the cold water, and I refilled some of my bottles to boil later. When we arrived back at camp, Fox gnawed on a rib while reluctantly letting me look at his injured ankle. It healed so much I knew he would be fine by tonight or tomorrow. Watching him chew though his bone stash, I wondered yet again what I was doing. Not only did I not leave him to die, I'd named him. There was something seriously wrong with me if I could get attached to a creature like this. You can eat me, you know. I told him, not knowing if he knew what I was saying. Fox looked over at my voice but didn't pause in his gnawing. Bone under his moss blanket, covering his face. Strangely enough, I wasn't scared of him. I'd already accepted my death for a while now. If he wanted to eat me next, I would almost welcome it. The rest of the day I let him wander around camp, and I kept the fire going and took a few short naps to catch up on sleep. When night fell, the fear of death finally came to me. I was inside the tent while Fox stayed beside the fire. I'd heard noises from outside and carefully crawled out from my sleeping bag to try and see the source. It sounded like a few people walking just outside where the firelight could reach. Fox tensed up, looking ready to attack if needed. I found my rifle, taking it into my hand as silently as I could. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and I could faintly see forms similar to Fox moving around in the trees. There was more of whatever he was in this forest. I stood waiting for them to make a move, rifle pointing downward. I didn't want to shoot one if they only showed up to pick up a missing member of their pack. One was brave enough to poke its head into the light. It was low to the ground, lanky elbows pointing up. It also had a blank wooden mask, but it had a mane of tangles branches covering the upper half of its body. For a second, I thought I spotted glowing eyes inside that heap of wood staring daggers at me. "Well, go on," I whispered to Fox, trying to encourage him to go and rejoin his group. Almost like cats, they got closer to each other on all fours, backs arched, studying and doing a half circle around each other. Other creatures appeared, watching the exchange, each having a mask of wood with some sort of pile of forest debris covering their faces. Some stood on two legs, making them almost 8 feet tall, other on all four, ready to swiftly run forward if startled. It looked like it was going well. Fox got closer to the other creature and reached a clawed hand over as a gesture I didn't understand. In a blink of an eye, they both flew into a flurry of motion. Horrible hissing and garbling cries came from the tangled pair, thrashing, trying to kill each other. My heart sank, and a pit of black fear opened up my stomach. Fox healed up a bit since he was with me, but he wasn't strong enough to fight off the newcomer, let alone all the ones in the woods watching. I accepted I would die, but I was not able to let Fox die with me. I lifted my rifle and aimed it away from the fight. I fired it off into the woods, aiming at nothing. I hoped the sound would make them stop, and it worked. The one creature stopped to look around for the sound. Fox kicked the other aside and scrambled to me as I ran over and stood between him and the other pale form. The newcomer was covered in scratches, dripping in blood. Fox looked worse. His arm broken and countless cuts on his thin body from the brief fight. Getting between them, I received a fast, long cut to my arm, but it was nothing compared to what Fox went through. I pointed the rifle towards the monster on all fours, ready to fire if needed. It stared at me from behind that faceless mask. The other creatures didn't move. I heard Fox shuffling around behind me, but I didn't turn to see what he was doing. When the other creature turned its head away from me to watch Fox, I finally did the same. He'd taken off the faceless wooden mask from his hood of moss and tossed it into the fire in front of all of us. The wood gave off a high-pitched shrieking sound as if it was an animal dying. Black flames shot up, spewing into the sky for a few seconds until the noise died down. The mask was burned up completely. Fox sat next to the fire, nursing his bad arm. Slowly, the creatures around us started to leave one by one until the one that attacked Fox remained. It sat, blood dripping from its wounds. Finally, it too turned and left us. My arm bleeding and rifle feeling heavy. Dropping my weapon, I collapsed to my knees. Caring about someone else was beyond stressful. White-hot pain started to come through my body from my cut. I found my arm was too heavy to move to see how deep the wound was. Trying to stand, my legs suddenly refused to work. Not knowing why, I fainted into a deep sleep I didn't awake from until it was morning. When I opened my eyes, I was inside my tent on my side. My arm out front of me so I could see the wound was stuffed with moss. I felt hot and too weak to move or do anything at all. I couldn't even move my fingers. Pain came in waves as I tried to ignore it. Focusing on anything but the throbbing in my arm, I listened to the pattering or rain outside. The light was gray and impossible to tell what time it was. The tent flap opened, letting cool air and misty rain come inside the tent. Fox must have been the one to put me in here, but he didn't know how zippers worked. My energy fading, I fell asleep again. The next few days I knew I was dying. Whatever got into my cut was nasty. That creature easily being able to kill with one strike of its claws. I slept most of the time, far too weak and feverish to move. Fox would keep me hydrated by lifting my head to let me drink from my steel water bottle I brought along. But the water tasted muddy. He was getting it from the river, not knowing to boil it. His efforts might just kill me faster. In my fevered dreams, I was tormented by the truth that haunted my every waking hour. The reason why I wanted death so badly, even though I was too much of a coward to do it myself. I wasn't there to hear the car accident, but was still plagued by the sounds. My mind repeated the sound of the officer knocking on my door at 4 in the morning to awkwardly tell me the news. His first time saying such tragic words to another person. And I knew it was all my fault. 5 years ago, I cheated on my wife. A one-night fling. I did not have a good reason aside from I just felt like it. I told her knowing I would be unable to hide it. She very understandably got upset and left the house to her brother's place 4 blocks away. They both drank and insulted me, something I rightfully deserved. To this day, I don't know why they decided to drive back home that night. She was too drunk to drive, but her brother thought he was fine. It was only 4 blocks away from our home, and yet they got into a 3-car pileup from people leaving the bar for the night. Everyone in my wife's car died that night. Everyone else in the other cars were lucky enough to receive injuries they could recover from. 3 people died. My wife, her brother, and our daughter in the back seat of the car. I went to sleep when she left and wasn't even aware she took our daughter to her brother's place with her. All because I made one decision to go home with a woman I thought was attractive. A whim killed 3 people. I needed to live with that fact for the rest of my life. Delirious from the fever, I could barely keep my eyes open. I saw Fox sitting next to me, his form blurry in my weak state. I couldn't handle falling back asleep and hearing my daughter was gone again. "Please, kill me," I begged him in a voice barely above a whisper. He didn't react for a long time. The longer I looked, the more I noticed he was slightly different, more human, his proportions not as lanky as before. He leaned in and I saw, instead of the moss covering his face, he replaced it with torn-up fabric that was once my clothing. He didn't keep it together with glue or thread. My tired brain wondered how the heaps of cloth stayed on his head. Reaching over, he took my arm, now red and infected from the cut. It caused a jolt of pain that almost knocked me out again to rattle my bones. Lifting my hand to his covered face, Fox lifted some of the rags to reveal a mouth of sharp teeth. Without any hesitation, he took my pinky finger off in one bite. I let out a soft scream, struggling to stay awake. Letting my hand drop, his long fingers came into view, moving directly to my throat. Darkness overtook me. I died. Fox choked the life out of me. Then, he gave some back. It's something beyond anything I could ever understand of how it happened. And I don't think I ever need to fully understand it. I woke up, scar on my arm, feeling better than I had in years. Aside from being stiff, my illness left me. I was still inside my tent, rain softly hitting against the outside. Looking to my side, a bundle of blankets was taking up most of the space. Peeking under them, Fox was curled up. He moved from his nest, being disturbed, but didn't wake up. I left him alone, climbing out of the tent, trying to get the kinks out of my back. It was still damp, but I was glad to be in the cool air outside. A few minutes passed after I came out, and I took stock of everything. My pinky was still gone, but wound healed along with the cut on my arm. Aside from my clothing being torn apart by Fox, nothing else touched the camp while I was out of commission. I was wondering what I should do when crunching of twigs drew my attention. A pair of men stood wearing raincoats over wet gear, both with rifles over their shoulders, unable to keep them dry. I thought I saw some chain poking out from one of their overpacked bags. Each seemed as if they were camping for a long time and worn down to the bone. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked the pair, voice cracking from a dry throat. I knew who they were. Without a doubt, they trapped Fox and left him hung up in a tree to die. I wondered if I was going to run into the people who did such a thing, and still didn't know how to react when it happened. "Have you seen anything strange at night?" One asked slowly while looking over my camp. I felt my hands start to shake and forced myself to keep them steady. "No, nothing. Terrible weather, don't you think? I'm going to pack up and leave today." I hoped I sounded casual enough. Glancing over, I saw Fox sitting up in the tent, moving around in the blanket pile silently. From the angle only I was the one who could see him. The 2 men looked at each other as if trying to decide something. If Fox saw them, would he kill them? Would I let him after what they did? If we let them go back into the forest, these 2 would kill more of those creatures. I was sure of that. Whatever was in the woods, they hunted them down. And I found that I didn't care. I didn't save Fox because of what he is. I saved him to give myself a reason to keep going. He was special because I'd named him and made him special. They hurt him before he became that. If they left, I wouldn't go after them. But if they dared trying to harm Fox now, I wouldn't hesitate in killing them. Either they were too tired to deal with me, or I looked natural enough for them to believe my lie. All right, take care of yourself, the older one said with a small wave of his hand. I watched as they left, still holding my breath. Fox poked out his head, covered in rags, directed towards the men who was already gone. Still not too late to go after them. Fox gave them no notice. Do you want to go home? I asked him, not even sure if he could understand me. When I left the woods, I took something with me. A creature that almost looks human now. I sold my house and bought a very small cabin by the lake. I figured it would be better suited for Fox being around woods. He's never spoken to me and I've never seen what face he hides. There is still so much I don't know about the monster I carried out of those woods. The only thing I do know about him is he's now my reason to keep living. I never needed a good one. I just needed something. Second story. Wendigos are coming back now. We can't escape. I'm from a small town, so you might not know about this. I'm living with my parents. Was living with my parents anyway, so I'm interested in cryptozoology. Wendigos, skinwalkers, all that. My friend came to me the other day and told me about this creature he saw with a deer skull outside of his house. His house is 2 houses down. It was a Wendigo. I told him what it was and what it does. He wanted to vomit. I wanted to vomit. We waited for a couple more days. We waited and waited until something happened. A park was near us, a couple of miles from us. A couple was killed there, and only their child emerged. It was a child no more than 7 or 8 years old, blonde. You get the picture. We pulled her aside and asked her what happened. She said something that will haunt me to my grave. She said that a deer skull creature had come to the park and told her to play with it. The parents played too. The girl said that they played hide and seek. She hid in a broken tree. I asked her what did she do after that, and she said she was never found, and then she came from the park. She said something horrifying. She said she heard her parents scream, and then she heard tearing, splattering, and screams of agony. Then some staff came over and pulled her aside. Before she could go, I asked her, I said, "How did it not kill you?" She said, "Because it wasn't there." A couple more days and about 34 children and 26 adults have been murdered, and there have been sightings of over 40 Wendigos eating, chatting. Me and my friends have decided enough is enough. We brought guns, flamethrowers, explosives. My friend, let's name him Ryan, he stockpiled on hundreds of shotgun shells, a Saga 12, AK-47, Glocks, and a homemade bomb. I got another friend. He took a lot of begging, but he agreed. We went to a park that was a hot spot for Wendigos. We found 4 bodies unknown. We went on and found a forest, and we said, okay, this is probably it. We went into the forest. We brought a Dodge Hellcat if we needed to escape. We ran for over a mile and slowed down and set camp. Ryan told me about eyes in the forest following us. My other friend, let's call him Scott, he was seeing dead, mangled animals on the ground. We found our first Wendigo. We went into the forest and found the Wendigo. It moved at unbelievable speeds at well over 100 miles per hour. We let Ryan unleash his Saga 12. The Wendigo let out horrid screams. I quickly pulled out a flamethrower and burned it alive. We sat there for 15 minutes as the Wendigo was cooking and screaming. We picked the body up and took out its heart. We heard more creatures. We knew it was more Wendigos. Before we could look to see what happened, Scott was gone. We found a trail of blood going deep into the woods. We couldn't go after him because there were 2 more of these damn things on us. I shot one over 14 times. It ran back into the forest. I went after the other Wendigo and cut its heart out with the sharpest stick I could find. Me and Ryan waited for over an hour, just sitting praying Scott would come back. Me and Scott went deeper only to find Scott's body. Mangled, he had no eyes, his ribs and insides were showing. We found a walkie-talkie next to his body. We turned it on and something spoke. It had Scott's voice. It said in his voice, "Help guys, it's eating my stomach," it said. We ignored it. We looked over and saw one of those little craps about 300 feet away from us. It was the one I shot God knows how many times. I ran towards it with flamethrower. I lit it up, and it was screaming in agony as I was burning it alive for over 20 minutes. I sat down next to Ryan. We both said we need to get Scott's body. Then Scott sat down next to us and said, "Hey guys, I'm back." We aimed our weapons at his chest, and we asked him a series of questions. He got all correct. We went home. We had slaughtered 3 Wendigos. We came back 3 days later. We brought our homemade bomb. We went into the forest for over 26 miles. We found 2 Wendigos. One of them killed Ryan, stole him, and nearly slaughtered him in the forest. We then blew up the Wendigo. The 3 of us went and shot the other Wendigo with a saga, 12 in the chest, hitting its heart, killing it. The Wendigos got retaliation and killed 2 people, only a fraction of their losses. Last week it was outside my window. It had the walkie-talkie. We both talked. At first said, "Want to come out to play? It looks nice out today." I snapped back, "No, you just want to kill me." "You are right, I will kill you. You look very appetizing up there." I got my AR-15 and shot it God knows how many times. It ran into the forest, and it said through the walkie-talkie with Sabrina's voice she was my sister, but she had been dead for over 3 years. It said, "All right, I will give you a choice in 1 hour. I will kill someone you love, or I can have your hand." Neither, I snarled back. It then said in Scott's voice, "All right, I will do both." Then I locked my door and slept, praying that I won't die tonight. I heard scratching in my door for over 4 hours. I screamed at my door. The Wendigo then said, "If you can eat, why can't I eat also? We need so much food, and right now we need food, and you are my food at the moment." I waited and waited and waited, wanting this thing to get out of my house. Then it ran out of my house. It ran with incredible speed out of my house. It ran so fast that I thought that the house was going to collapse any second. Scott and Ryan went out of state to Ohio. We found more Wendigos. They had followed us to Ohio. They rammed our vehicle with such force it went flying over 600 yards away. We unloaded shots straight onto them and did some numbers, taking out 6 of them. We had to retreat back to our town over 80 miles away. We almost died several times along the way. More killings have been inflicted, 2 couples, 4 children, and 16 adults. 3 days ago, my friend Ryan was found dead. Me and Scott stayed up for several hours discussing this. I was suspicious of Scott because I felt he had this dark force around him. I asked him well over 30 questions. I didn't care. I was going to spot an error. After 3 hours, he got no incorrect. Over 14 hours later, Scott then looked at me. He smiled and he had jagged teeth. He then said, "He tasted like cherries, and one day I'll taste you too." Third story. The hikers. I was always one for adventure and seeking new experiences. So when my friends invited me on a camping trip to a remote snowy mountain, I jumped at the chance. We were a group of 6, all experienced hikers and outdoor enthusiasts, and we set out with high spirits and a thirst for adventure. As we hiked through the snow-covered forests, the beauty of our surroundings took our breath away. The crisp mountain air and the brilliant white of the snow made us feel like we were in a different world. But as the sun began to set, the temperature dropped and the shadows grew longer. We set up our tents and built a fire, huddled together as the wind howled through the trees. As we settled in for the night, we laughed and told stories, feeling safe and secure in our little cocoon of warmth and light. But as the night wore on, strange things began to happen. The wind grew louder and more frantic, whipping the snow into a frenzy. And then we heard it, a sound that sent shivers down our spines. A howl, long and mournful, echoing through the mountains. We tried to ignore it, telling ourselves that it was just the wind, but the howls continued, growing more and more frequent. And then we saw them, the eyes, glowing yellow and red, peering at us through the darkness. We huddled together, trying to reassure each other that it was just a pack of wolves. But as the night went on, the howls grew louder and closer, until we could feel their breath on our necks. In the morning, We found footprints in the snow around our campsite, footprints that were far too large to belong to any wolf. We realized that whatever was out there, it was not just a pack of wild animals. We decided to cut our trip short and head back down the mountain, but as we set out, we found that our path was blocked by an impassable ravine. We were trapped, with no way to escape the icy mountain and the unknown terror that lurked in the shadows. As the days passed, we grew weaker and more desperate. Our food supplies were running low, and the howls grew louder and more persistent. We started to see things, movements in the shadows, glimpses of something large and hulking lurking in the trees. And then, one by one, my friends began to disappear. At first, we thought that they had wandered off, lost in the snow and cold. But as the disappearances continued, we realized that something far more sinister was at work. I was the only one left, huddled in my tent, listening to the howls of the night. And then, on the fourth night, I felt a presence outside my tent, something large and hulking, breathing heavily. I knew that my time was up, that I was going to meet the same fate as my friends. And as I lay there, waiting for the end, I remembered a story that one of my friends had told me on the first night of our trip. It was a legend about a creature that roamed the mountains, hunting down travelers and devouring them in the night. They called it the Wendigo, a monster made of ice and snow and darkness, with a heart as cold as the mountain itself. And as I felt its breath on my face, I knew that the legend was true. The Wendigo had come for me, and I was its next victim. Fourth story. I think I saw a Wendigo through the train window. It is as the title states. I am fairly certain that I saw a Wendigo out the window of the train. If that were the only event that happened, then I wouldn't have any reason to tell my story. In order to get into what happened, let me start off at the beginning of my day. It was a normal Saturday as far as I was concerned. I stayed up until about 3 a.m. playing the newest online mobile game with my brothers. Yes, I know, it is considered a sin to cheat by using my brother's screens to determine who the imposter is, but I'm not getting into that debate right now. I woke up not too long after 9 a.m., played on my phone a while, and then hopped out of bed, threw on the same clothes I had on the day before, and headed downstairs to the kitchen. I threw together my favorite breakfast food while my brothers both groggily dragged their feet to meet me. My twin brother, Gabe, decided to shower to wake himself up, while my younger brother, Zach, decided to partake in the feast of homemade waffles with peanut butter and chocolate milk. By the time Gabe was dressed and sitting at the kitchen table, Zach and I had already finished putting the dishes into our dishwasher and cleaned off the table. I had packed in advance and my train wasn't for a few more hours, so my brothers and I had pulled our phones out and began terrorizing the servers of Among Us for a little while. After we grew tired from the online insults and cyberbullying that we received for cheating, we played some Mortal Kombat on our PS4. It was a very relaxing morning, all things considered. As I prepared to collect my luggage and leave for the train station, I reiterated the food plans to my siblings. The roast is in the slow cooker. All you'll have to do is clean up. It is going to be finished at 6 today, and if you aren't sure if it's done, then shoot me a picture. I continued speaking over my Gabe's attempts of assuring me that they'd be fine without me. Remember, tomorrow is oven-baked chicken fingers and fries. After school Monday is burgers, and you can order anything you want for Tuesday and pay a tip. I rushed my sentence as Gabe held the front door of our tiny rented house open for me. Chrissy, we'll be fine, okay? Chill out, okay? Gabe chuckled to himself. You're right, you'll be fine. Do your homework. I love you guys. See you Wednesday. I called to them as I headed down the paved driveway and towards the bus stop down the road.
Hasta la vista, baby.
As Zach yelled my favorite movie reference of all time at me, I couldn't help but smile. They'll be fine. I raised them well, I thought to myself. I looked at them waving in the open front door and gave them a very flat and stern expression. "I'll be back." I deepened my voice as best as possible before smiling and heading back towards the bus stop. My parents were extremely busy people all our lives. Gabe was born with a learning disability and required more attention from my parents than I needed. I had to grow up and mature faster to be able to take care of Gabe, as our mother was a full-time principal in our local school and a part-time student tutor, while my father worked as a warehouse manager full-time and was often working the midnight shifts. He worked those shifts due to the employees' reputations to be unproductive. He always said he needed to straighten them out. My father would sleep all day, and my mother would work all day. I would always prepare Gabe's lunches and walk him to school, walk him home and make him dinner. I helped him with his homework. I read him bedtime stories. I tucked him into bed. I was always there for him. Zach was born a week before my 9th birthday with Gabe. By now, Gabe had quickly matured, surprising everyone. He was potentially even smarter and more socially acceptable than I was, though he didn't have the same parenting skills that I had developed and therefore wasn't entirely confident in even turning on an oven or setting a microwave timer. Anyways, by the time Zach came around, I was well aware that I'd have to raise him too. I so desperately wanted my mom and dad to be real parents for little Zach, to be there for him and be what Gabe and I never had. But I knew deep down inside that that wouldn't happen. By the time I was Gabe and I were 18 and Zach had just turned 9, the three of us moved out and into our own apartment. I wasn't even sure that our parents would notice Zach's absence, to be honest. They had no issues with us all moving in together. They said to me themselves that they knew Zach was better off with us than them. They said he was never supposed to be, which entirely angered me. Because of this, Gabe and I started to call Zach our miracle brother. Despite our age gap, the three of us were extremely close with one another. It was us three against the world. Nobody would change that. Then about a year ago, I fell in love with my old high school crush. His name is Brian. We were always close friends since grade 9, but as high school came to a close and we parted ways for university, we confessed our love. It was a very corny movie moment to me. Even through long distance, we made our relationship work. Gabe and Zach were obviously jealous that Brian was taking all of my attention. They were afraid that Brian was going to take me away from them. All that aside, they liked my boyfriend. They were all friendly and had good laughs together. They were happy for us. So here I am, at the train station awaiting my train to my boyfriend on our first-year anniversary. I anxiously awaited the train, wondering with me when I got back. Maybe they were mad already, or maybe they aren't upset at all. I talked myself into thinking that I was doing the right thing. Even though my stomach was turning violently, I was feeling very nauseous. It had nothing to do with anything I ate. I had a horrible feeling. Something inside me was telling me that something bad was going to happen. I didn't listen to it at the time. I thought it was all just the nerves of traveling. I was just too excited to see Brian. The train was quite long. It went from my small little town of southern Ontario to the northern and frigid climate that is stereotypically portrayed as all of Canada. Overall, the trip to Brian's apartments was close to 12 hours, however. That includes the train ride along with the bus and the drive that Brian has to take from his apartment to where I arrive on the train and back to his apartment. I had boarded the train and been seated when one of the train staff members asked to scan my ticket. I quickly apologized for not being prepared and dug through my luggage to find my ticket. After ensuring that I was settled and asking if I had wanted any food or drink for the ride, the staff member had moved along down the aisle. I looked around the car, noticing only 3 other passengers before pulling out my laptop from my bag and popping my headphones into my ears. I sent a text to my parents informing them of my absence from my hometown for the next few days and threw on some YouTube. Gaming channels were always a favorite, but recently Gabe had gotten me hooked onto a game theory channel. I could sit there for hours watching the different conspiracy theories about video game lore, and for the first half of my trip, that's exactly what I did. The early winter sunset filled the skies with orange and pink highlights as I had decided to put my laptop away and watch the window with my music playlist on. I had always enjoyed listening to music on long trips, especially across the country. I tried to imagine cheesy movie scenes taking place in the open fields with slow songs playing and faceless couples slow dancing. Within about an hour after I first peered out my window, the snow had begun. At first it was a light flurry, hardly visible as the train sped along the tracks. Eventually it was blizzarding. Simply looking outside gave me chills as I never enjoyed being in the snow. Snow is pretty, but from afar, I'd always say. I shivered underneath my thick leather jacket as the train came to a slow stop in a remote northern town. This was not my stop, as the train station itself was visibly the largest building in the entire town. Anyone could stand on one end of the town and see the other side down the road, even in the blizzard-like conditions that were present. As the train waited, I kept my eyes focused outside my window. No passengers had left the car, and no additional passengers had boarded. I found this to be very strange, as the train needed to always stay on schedule. Little time was available for simply stopping. There must have been something wrong with one of the employees or the conductor, or possibly even the train itself. Attention passengers, we apologize for the delay. We will continue on our trip in 5 minutes. Once again, we apologize for the delay. We thank you for choosing to ride with us and enjoy your evening. The overhead speakers broke through my thoughts and pulled me back into reality. I simply looked around the car for a moment and then texted Brian to let him know of the 5-minute delay. When I looked back outside my window again was when I saw it. The tall figure was hunched over and with its back towards me. I could see the back of its white skull and its antlers broken and distorted. It was extremely frail, its limbs impossibly long and spindly. The creature was in the tree line across the town. Hardly any specific details were noticeably through the extreme snow. However, I recognized right away the creature. Doubt had settled in almost as fast as the creature seemed to appear. Has it always been there? Was my mind playing tricks on me? It became more and more obvious the longer I gawked at it. How had I not noticed it until now? What the hell? I whispered under my breath. At the moment I was so quiet that I wasn't even sure I had said it out loud. Just as soon as I questioned, the creature whirled its head at a near 180-degree angle to face me. The black pits for eyes stared deep into my soul. This creature had heard me, and now this creature had seen me. I was sure of it. Its mouth unhinged, and an animal's corpse fell out, blood spilling everywhere. Whatever this creature had been consuming was too mangled to determine what it really was. The train jolted to life and crawled across the tracks, gradually gaining speed. I was startled from the sudden movement and jumped nearly out of my seat. The creature only stared as I sped off. I scrambled to get my laptop out of my bag and reconnect it to the train's Wi-Fi. I spent the last 2.5 hours of my trip researching the creature. This is where I had learned of its name, Wendigo. This creature had been a part of native folklore for many generations. I nearly couldn't hold my dinner in when I read about the stories of cannibals becoming Wendigos hundreds of years ago. After reading other people's close encounters online, I was more and more convinced that what I saw was real. I was ready to move on and forget about my encounter with the Wendigo by the time I stepped off the train. I practically fell into Brian's arms and broke down, a mixture of fear and emotions of sadness and loneliness overtaking me all at once. I was grateful to be there with him, in his arms when I needed him most. I told him about my encounter with the cryptid on the drive back to his apartment. I believe that you definitely saw something, he began, his doubt unintentionally present in his voice. I just don't believe that a creature like that exists is all. Like, how come the only solid proof of its existence are tall tales and folklore? I dunno, Brian. I quietly looked to my feet. He reached one of his hands off the wheel and held mine firmly and reassuringly. I don't know what it is, I guess. It feels real to me. Well, that's good enough for me, he said calmly. That's enough reason for me to keep you safe. His classic cute grin formed on his face, revealing only a few of his nearly perfect white teeth. Oh, you need a reason to keep me safe? I jokingly said, as if he had said something offensive. Well, no. He stumbled over his words. Who? I made it comically clear that I was not believing him. Brian had managed to make me forget all about my terrible experience hours ago. We were laughing and joking around as he pulled into his parking space in his apartment complex. The building itself hadn't been very tall, only about 10 stories. The building itself was nearly completely surrounded by dark Canadian woods. His town wasn't very large, only about 8,000 residents. Beautiful lush, evergreen forests surrounded the little city, with nearly every house having its own tree in the front lawn. Sparkling white snowflakes gently fell around me as I stepped out of Brian's car. The parking lot was lightly covered in snow before I had managed to make it to the entrance of the building. Brian, like the gentleman he is, carried my luggage from the car and to the apartment. He was talking about one of the regular customers at his fast food part-time job when I cut him off. Listen, I said in a hushed whisper. The hairs on my arms stood on end. Goosebumps formed all over my body. Someone was watching us. I could feel it. I scanned the tree line, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I don't hear anything, Chris. Exactly. It's so quiet. There weren't any noises around. Not a single sound. Only the eerie dead silence. Is it always this quiet? In the middle of the night? Yeah, it is. Brian wasn't making me feel any better. What's wrong, Chrissy? You still spooked? Let's just go inside. I don't like it out here. I clung onto his arm and rushed towards the front doors. Once inside and in the elevator, I told him what I read online. I explained that the absence of any natural noises or wild animals typically means there's a predator around. With his apartment complex close to some dark woods, I wasn't very calm. I also told him how I felt that we were being watched from something in the woods. Babe, your nerves are probably just shot. He held me close to him, trying to calm me down. I promise you're safe here. It's gone. I promise. He drifted off. That night I dreamed that the creature had followed us. I saw from its point of view as it followed our car towards Brian's apartment. I saw as it watched us get out from the car and head inside. And I saw as it crawled into bed behind me, holding me in place. Don't move, it hissed, its hot breath on my ear. I woke up in a cold sweat. Brian was sound asleep beside me, looking peaceful as ever. I went to the kitchen and got myself a glass of water. I put on my warm, fuzzy housecoat over top of my pajamas and stood outside on the balcony. Some fresh air would do me good, I thought to myself. It was 3:20 in the morning, and there I was on the balcony of the 7th floor, contemplating a cigarette. I wanted to quit ever since I had taken ownership of my brothers, but on that balcony, I felt as though I had so desperately needed one. Feeling ashamed of myself for even considering one, I threw the only cigarette I had off the balcony. I needed to get a hold of myself before I returned home. I couldn't let Zach see me like this. Gabe would scold me if he were here, I thought. Wiping tears off my face, I looked around the tree line. I was just starting to regain my composure when I noticed something out of place. In the tree line was the deer skull. The horrid creature's body was undoubtedly attached to it. It just stared at me. I whirled around and nearly dove inside Brian's apartment. I slammed the balcony glass door shut and locked it. As I headed to make sure the front door was locked, Brian intercepted me, forcing a scream out of me. "What's the matter, Christina?" Brian held me by my arms. I wouldn't stop wailing. All that I could get out was, "It's following me," in between the sobs. He held me in a close hug until I was calm enough to explain my nightmare and about the creature I saw mere moments ago. "Stay here," he said as he headed towards the balcony and took a look outside. I watched as he unlocked the door and stepped onto the balcony. A chill went down my spine, but not because of the wintry night air flowing into the apartment. Brian just stood there, staring at one spot. After a long pause, he slowly backed into the apartment, not taking his eyes off the creature outside. I knew he saw it. I knew he believed me. I could see it in his face. His eyes wide with fear, his mouth only slightly ajar. Without looking at me, he said, "The parking lot is in the back of the complex. Get your things. We can't stay here." "Are you crazy? That thing is outside. It's following me." I nearly yelled, panic setting in. I felt as though I was going to vomit. That thing. It told me Brian was in terror. I don't know how, but it told me that it was going to come inside. I gasped, tears streaming down my face. "We have to go," he urged. I grabbed his hand and he grabbed his keys, and we rushed out the front door. We ran to the elevator and rapidly hit the down button. I decided that taking the stairs was faster and bolted through the door towards the stairs, Brian following right behind me. Reaching the stairwell, I looked to the bottom before descending the stairs. About halfway down the first flight, I heard heavy tapping coming from the bottom. I leaned over the banister and saw the undead deer creature making its way up the stairs. Brian nearly bumped into me as I spun around and sprinted up the stairs crying and screaming. He followed my lead without question as I headed towards the elevator, doors just beginning to open. We both cramped ourselves into the elevator and Brian rapidly pushed the ground floor button. Just as the double doors slowly closed, we saw the stairwell doorway open and the animal's snout making its way towards us. We held each other, Brian verbally praying and me regretting most of my past life's choices. Ground floor and parking the elevator dinged, cueing us to make our hasty escape. We ran like our lives depended on it, because in those long moments, they did. On our way to Brian's car, I slipped and fell into the snow. Brian, who was ahead of me, turned around and prepared to help me up. "No, go. Start the car. Go." I yelled frantically as I slowly made my way to my feet. He spun around and ran towards the car again. I took one step forward and fell to my knees, pain pulsing through my ankle. I loudly groaned in pain, clenching my teeth. I managed to get to my feet and half-limp, half-jog to the car. Just as I closed the passenger door, the front doors of the apartment complex were violently torn from their hinges. The creature held nothing back as it sprinted on all fours towards the car. "Hang on." Brian shifted the car into drive and floored it. Normally, the wintry road conditions would have evoked anxiety in me, but right now I felt as though Brian wasn't driving fast enough. I kept my eyes glued to the rear-view mirror, watching the creature gallop towards us, its skinny form seemingly moving in unnatural angles with each step. "Are you all right?" Brian asked of deep concern, his eyes trained on the road ahead. "I think that I broke my ankle. I managed to get out in between breaths." He cursed under his breath. "I don't think we can get you to a hospital with that thing on our asses," Brian thought out loud. Did you bring your phone? I asked him. I'm going to call the police. Damn it. No, I left mine at the apartment, Brian said plainly. I quietly sobbed as I too had left my phone in the rush. We are going to die tonight, aren't we? I said out loud, not wanting an answer. No, babe, don't say that. Things are going to be fine. We'll make it out of this. Will we? Will we actually, Brian? I yelled at him, tears streaming down his face too. He was terrified, just like me, and yet he was trying to protect me and keep me calm. I stumbled an apology in between sobs, but Brian cut me off. It's gone. He slowed the car to a stop and looked all around. Where did it go? It's gone. Where did it go? I too began to look around, unease settling in. I'm not sure what was more horrific, seeing the creature pursue us or not being able to see it but feel that it was still there. We sat there in the car for a long while, just looking around desperately. In the distance down the road, I noticed headlights. I pointed them out to Brian, and he flashed his high beams off and on. The car pulled over to the side of the road and Brian got out to talk to the driver. I bit my lip, not enjoying the idea of Brian getting out of the car. Please, call the police. We need an ambulance too. I heard Brian talk to the driver. Just as Brian made his way back to the car, the creature came out of the darkness and took him in its grasp. It happened so quickly. He was just gone. Only a few drops of blood on the ground to prove that he was even there. The man in his car across the road screamed and sped off. I sat there, stunned and no doubt in shock. The monster rammed into my passenger side door head first, breaking me from my trance. It broke through the window and shoved its face towards me. I struggled against my seatbelt and repeatedly kicked it in its hollow skull. It caught my leg in its mouth and clamped its jaws down hard. I screamed from the pain, blood pooling around my wounds. I heard the horrific sound of my leg being bitten through as the beast crunched through bone. All I could do was scream, biting down on my other leg. It pulled me through the window. I screamed for my life, but it was no use. With ease it had flung me face first into a nearby tree, and everything went black instantly. My entire body seared with pain as blurry images of men and women in police uniforms and rescue uniforms loaded me onto a bed and into an ambulance. I was drifting in and out of consciousness. When I had finally come to full consciousness, I was in a hospital bed and hooked up to countless pieces of machinery. I had a feeding tube and an oxygen tube in me. My arm had an IV in it, heartbeat monitors attached to my chest. The nurse reading my file gasped when she saw me awake and rushed out of the room. The PA system announced several doctors to where I assumed I was located. Within minutes, the doctors were unhooking the feeding tube and oxygen tube, as I had no longer needed them. We expected you to be in a coma for at least another month. One of the doctors explained to me after the tubes were removed. Another month? I asked before clearing my throat. It still felt as though I had those plastic tubes shoved down my throat. You were out for 6 weeks. You were in a very brutal car accident. While waiting for the emergency vehicles to arrive, you were attacked by an animal. It was a very horrible scene. I blankly stared at him. Don't you remember, Christine? He cocked his head to the side and gave me a quizzical look. It's Christina, I corrected him. And no, I don't, I lied. I laid there for hours remembering the horrible nightmare that happened to me nearly 2 months ago. My whole body ached and pulsed with pain. I could hardly move. I thought about Brian for the longest time. I assumed he had to be dead, but he had shown up later that night. I came as soon as I heard that you were awake, he told me as he leaned over and kissed my forehead. After the creature had attacked me, it went for you. I watched as it threw you against the tree. I tried to pull it off you, but it threw me away. It told me that it wanted you. It told me that you saw something that you weren't supposed to see," Brian explained. By the time the police and ambulances showed up, the creature had already left. I never saw it leave. It was just somehow gone. I rode with you in the back. The officers recorded it as a bear attack. They didn't believe my story. Brian went on to say that he was administered into the hospital for a day with only flesh wounds and stitches. He said that he and my brothers and parents visited me nearly every day or so. "My parents came?" I asked, stunned. He nodded, giving me a half smile. "In fact, they gave me a call on my way here. They're headed up with your brothers. They said that they'll try to get here before breakfast. When they got the call that you were awake, they pretty much dropped what they were doing and hopped in the car." I teared up and smiled. "What did you tell them about what happened?" "The police told them what they thought happened. I went with it because I want them to like me." I giggled. Then I struggled to sit up. Brian rushed over to give help and sit me up. I reached down to scratch my leg, but I couldn't quite find the spot. "Hey, hon, can you help me? I've got an itch and I can't reach it. I'm too sore to be reaching down." I looked at Brian, and he smiled back at me. "Sure, babe, whereabouts?" "My left leg, just below the kneecap." Brian went pale suddenly. "What's wrong?" I removed the blankets as a wave of adrenaline washed over me. Both of my legs were gone from just above the knees. I was still coping with my new handicap when my younger brothers, accompanied by my parents, rushed into the room and nearly knocked the wind out of me in a big hug each. "Guys, I'm okay."
I'm all right.
I laughed a little out loud from pure happiness. "They said you might not wake up," Zach sobbed as he held me close. They were talking to Mom and Dad about having to pull the plug on you," Gabe said grimly. "Aw, guys, doctors aren't always right. Look."
I'm fine.
Then I looked to my parents, both of them clearly holding back tears. "We love you so much, Christina. Don't you ever go thinking otherwise." My mom's voice on the verge of breaking. "Come back and live with us, okay? You'll be needing someone to look after you." My father chimed in. "I'll have Gabe dash I started. We've moved back in with Mom and Dad," Gabe said, giving me a warm smile. I looked over to Brian, who gave me a, "You should listen to them," look with a smile to top it off. "I'll come back home. When they let me out of here." I couldn't finish. I cried of happiness. My parents loved me after all. My parents embraced me in a hug each, and my dad stepped out of the room to talk to one of the nurses. "How was the drive up?" I asked my mom, wiping a tear from my face. "Oh, not too bad. The first few hours there was a little snow, but once we passed through Oshawa, Toronto area, it wasn't too bad." "Oh, nice," I trailed off. Oh, Chrissy." Zach grew excited. "I saw something really cool on the drive up." "Oh, that's right. Go on. Tell your sister," my mom encouraged. "It was a bear-looking creature, but it was wearing this animal's skull. I think it was a deer's skull. And the bear looked real skinny and tall. Isn't that something?" My mom looked at me. I just looked to Brian. I knew I was probably as pale as he was in that moment. "I didn't see anything," Gabe stated matter-of-factly. I ignored him. "Yeah, it was freaky." Gabe missed it. "I saw it too. I don't think your father saw it." My mother's voice grew distant as I stared at Brian. "Are you okay? You don't look so good," someone asked me, but I wasn't sure who. "Maybe you all should go home early. I'll bring Chrissy back down when she's out of the hospital," Brian said. "You all have lives to get back to." "Oh, Brian, that's so sweet of you, but we'll pass. We've got a hotel room nearby, and we took the boys off school," my mom said in her fake cheery voice. "Mom," I stated in the most serious tone I could muster up, "listen to me very carefully. You have seen something that you weren't meant to see. That thing. It's on its way right now. I teared up. It's coming to find you. And little Zachy? Fifth story. I'm a skeptic, but I've seen the Wendigo. I'm the sort of person who is skeptical of any claims regarding the existence of the supernatural. My wife claims to see ghosts/dead people and that she's an empath, and I'll concede that she's a very good guesser regarding other people's emotions and the history of places and families. But I can't accept her statements as fact because they're not empirically provable. With that said, you can believe me or not, but what I'm about to say is something that even I have a lot of trouble disbelieving. I can't say I've had any paranormal experiences in my life, but there are several things that happened when I was quite young that I simply can't explain. By the time I was about 12 to 18 months old, I had either a memory or a very vivid imagination of my life before birth. I was floating up in the sky, standing on thin air, with no land in any direction. In front of me was a kindly middle-aged Native American man wearing a plain white robe. He asked me if I was ready. Some kind of vision flashed before my eyes, and when I said yes, I somehow descended and experienced my own birth. Keep in mind that this is before I was able to comprehend what birth was. I also didn't know about Native Americans yet. When I was about 6 or 7, I started getting very distinct mental images of something extremely disturbing. What I saw was a tanned, mummified-looking, emaciated, dead face. The eyes were glassy but somehow horribly alive, and the lips and nose were shrunken. The creepiest thing about the face was the too wide smile and a full set of very white teeth. When I was 9 or 10, I read for the first time about some expedition or other in the Antarctic where several ill-fated members of an expeditionary group died and were left behind. Their bodies were recovered in the 20th century, and the article I was reading had images of them. I had never seen a frozen body before, but as soon as I saw those pictures, I immediately correlated what I was reading with the thing I'd seen earlier in life. From that point onward, I started having almost real waking visions, in a way that's hard to explain more than just in my mind's eye, and yet not exactly as if it were actually in front of me, of something that is basically my worst nightmare. It was an 8 or 9 foot tall. I know this because its head almost touched the ceiling, frozen corpse, completely naked, with long arms and legs. It was the same face I'd seen before in my mind, with shrunken features, etc. Only now it had a full body that was just as emaciated and mummified as the head and neck were. I only saw it on cloudy days in the late fall or winter, and always when it was between me and a window, so it was sort of backlit. It never made any motion to do anything, just stared down at me with that horrible grin. In high school, I got onto Wikipedia at some point and finally learned what the thing was, the Wendigo. For those who don't know, it's a mythical spirit creature in Algonquian legend. I was born in Connecticut and have about 1% Native American blood in me from about 400 years ago. My first traceable ancestors in America came over shortly after the Mayflower, and one of them married a Native American woman. Now do you see part of why I'm so creeped out? According to legend, the Wendigo was an evil spirit associated with starvation, the winter, and cannibalism. It either lured desperate people into eating their fellow humans during the winter, or possessed those who did resort to cannibalism. There are various stories about how it looked, but most of them agree that it looks like a frozen corpse, generally taller than a human, and no, it doesn't have antlers like in all the modern depictions you'll find via Google search. It reportedly can ride on the winter wind, mimic human voices to lure the unwary into ambushes, and has a heart made of ice. Here's the thing. I experienced this before I ever identified what the creature was or knew about the legends. Only after almost a decade of intermittently seeing the Wendigo did I come across this description, courtesy of the Wikipedia article. The Wendigo was gaunt to the point of emaciation, its desiccated skin pulled tautly over its bones. With its bones pushing out against its skin, its complexion the ash gray of death, and its eyes pushed back deep into their sockets, the Wendigo looked like a gaunt skeleton recently disinterred from the grave. What lips it had were tattered and bloody, unclean and suffering from suppurations of the flesh. The Wendigo gave off a strange and eerie odor of decay and decomposition, of death and corruption. I've done some further research, and all of the information I found from various sources all concurs with what I saw. So, I'm remotely linked to the Native Americans with whom the legend originated. I have always had a deathly, no pun intended, fear of dead bodies, especially mummified-looking ones. And I saw a creature from their stories long before I learned that what I saw matched the traditional descriptions perfectly. I was, and still am, skeptical, but even I can't ignore these coincidences. I'm also a Christian, Presbyterian, and therefore am quite wary of any claims of ghosts or supernatural entities inhabiting the world due to my beliefs. But even so, this thing has stuck with me for years. I saw it earlier today, which is why I'm here at all. Anyone got any insight? I've considered seeking out a highly knowledgeable Algonquian person to figure out what to do, but I'm torn because I also have some reservations about that from a religious perspective. Also, I promise this post is sincere and not a fictional account that should be posted elsewhere. It sounds pretty fantastic even to me, the person who experienced it, but I can't shake the feeling that this isn't just my imagination. Edit. I forgot to mention, I was born in Connecticut and moved to South Carolina when I was about 7. I've been seeing it here in the South for almost 20 years now, even though I've moved all across the state during that time. Not sure if that's relevant, because the Algonquians are situated in Virginia and up into Canada if I understand it right, and never came this far south. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.